Every character, location, or experience you've read about in my crime fiction novels holds a piece of reality. I'm Helen Taylor. Welcome to the story behind my stories, the video podcast where crime fiction meets my authentic experience. Here, we delve into the real-life inspirations and intimate stories that shaped my novels. Discover how my everyday encounters, adventures, and travels translate into tales as gripping as they are genuine. The story behind my stories goes behind the words on the page to reveal the backstory that inspires my writing. Hit follow or subscribe and ensure you're part of this journey. Welcome to the story behind my stories. I am Helen Taylor, author of the D.I. Matthew Goodwin crime fiction series. I'm going to start right back at the beginning, when I was a kid. I was bottom of my class in English. I was a scientist through and through. I loved maths and logic, structure and patterns. Creativity, English, literature, and especially spelling were just not my forte, and they were hard for me. I was artistic and I loved painting, but somehow I lost that too, as the logic, analytical and scientific side of me thrived. When I was young, horses were everything for me. I always wanted my own horse, and I spent all of my time at the stables. I never did anything else from about 6 years old unless it involved horses. Horses featured in the books I read, the dreams I had, the films I watched, and the way I spent all of my time. But as a kid, you have to go to school and you have to do the subjects you just don't like. English was one of those for me. The first piece of advice I ever got about writing was one day I was riding at the stables on my favourite horse, but it wasn't working. I wasn't gelling with him that day, and my instructor seemed to be telling me more and more to concentrate, to focus, to get my aids right. Then she stopped the lesson. And she said to me, "What is wrong with you? You're just not here today. Your head is somewhere else entirely. Are you going to tell me what's wrong?" I blurted it all out. I was worried about an essay I had to write for English, panicking about where to start. How many words I had to write about something I had no interest in. All we'd been given to write the essay was the title, At the End of the Garden. What do I write? About the hedge leading to the orchard at the end of my garden? Or imagine something that lived there, and how do I make a story of that? I told my writing instructor all of this. I told her that I had no idea where to start, what to write. It had to be something from my imagination, and I had none. I thought, I need to have some amazing idea, some science fiction creature, a superhero, or something. I didn't know about any of that, and I couldn't imagine it. You've got to have loads of imagination, and I just didn't know where to start. I had a complete blocker on it. That day, my writing instructor gave me the piece of advice that changed my view of creative writing forever. She told me, write what you know. I had not understood what she meant, and she explained to me, writing is easy when it's something you know. Yes, you can research. Yes, you can find out and then know. But if you write what you know, if you write what you're passionate about, and if you write what you have experience of, then it will just come. I still wasn't sure I believed her or what that meant until she said, "Your horse lives at the end of your garden. You have a stable there. It doesn't have to be real. That's what a story is. Once you have started writing about horses, then you'll be fine. You know about horses, and then you can write anything." Light bulb moment for me. And she was right. My best essay in English was that one entitled "At the End of the Garden." Now you may be thinking, working on that basis, that as I write crime fiction, that I'm some major criminal that has been out there and committed all of these evil crimes and murders, kidnappings, blackmail. No, that's not the bit I know about. As my intro says, the characters, the locations, and my travels are what I know. So if you come on this journey with me to find out what inspires me to write what I do, then you will find the locations for sure are places I've been, or spent a lot of time there, or lived in. The experiences are ones that I have had, or, as you will find out, have had similar and have just tweaked to put in my novels. So before I start telling you where Tie-Dye came from, my first novel, let me explain why it's crime fiction I write. The second valuable piece of advice I was given. I am a law-abiding citizen, and I've definitely never gone anywhere near blackmail, murder, or anything like that. The second piece of advice is why I write crime fiction. It was given to me just before I first went to Thailand. I don't remember who gave me that piece of advice or how I received it, which is odd because usually conversations, events, experiences that have had an impact on me I remember really vividly, hence how I can recreate them in my novels. But I do remember the piece of advice, which was, write what you read. After I left my love of horses and they drifted into my past, partly from developing allergies to animal fur, partly from growing up and partly from other life events taking hold, I exchanged my horse and pony books, magazines and movies with a new love, crime fiction. Not just reading it, but watching movies, TV series, all sorts. I love the psychological thrillers. I love action thrillers. I like murder mysteries, the puzzle ones and whodunits, gritty detectives, all the CSI, police dramas, legal dramas, and everything in between. Over the 10 or 15 years before I went to Thailand, that's all I watched, read, and enjoyed. I did have a short episode in my teens and early 20s when I was a big fan of romance fiction. But I think a very young, failed marriage sort of killed that. Though the odd steamy scene appears in connecting trains and occasional romances across my books, so I read crime fiction and I watch crime series and movies. So, if I remember rightly, the story behind that piece of advice is if you read a lot of a particular genre, you absorb a lot, so it sort of backs up the write what you know advice too. But it isn't just some terms like an avid watcher of CSI might pick up a load of crime scene terms. A fan of Quincy might pick up autopsy terms. Watching The Bill might give you some police procedural. None of them would give you all of it. They have poetic license too. And then obviously there is a different terminology, different laws, and different crimes, depending on whether you're in the UK or America. And a lot of the crime fiction that I read and the TV series I watched were set on both sides of the pond. So whilst reading the genre that you also write, you may observe some snippets of terminology and procedure. Writing about something that you really know nothing about, as I said, I'm not a criminal and I'm not a policeman. I'm not a detective, I'm not a doctor, nor a lawyer, is easier than a subject you've had zero exposure to. But you do pick up other things. For example, I remember for my O-levels, and yes, I am old enough to have done O-levels, we had to do Cider with Rosie by Laurie Lee. A lovely book, a classic, but I struggled with it. It felt so slow. You could take out vast amounts of the description in the book, and it would end up being a very short story. If you read romance books, like all the Danielle Steele books I read when I was in my late teens and early 20s, those sorts of books are much more about the feelings, the emotions, the relationships between your characters. There are genres that are more descriptive, some that are more relationship and character based, and some that are wildly imaginative, that need lots of description for you to grasp what the author is trying to tell you, like science fiction. And the thing about writing what you read is you absorbed some of that writing style of the genre through being an avid reader of that genre. You can't write a crime thriller describing in great detail the secondary characters, relationships outside of the investigation, or surroundings, unless they add to the story or directly impact the narrative. In the same way, you can't rush through with little emotion the forming of a relationship in a romance novel. That is what I feel that piece of advice gives me. So when you read my novels, the description, I feel, is only to give you an idea of the place or the space that it is happening in, and how that directly impacts the characters and the investigation. Similarly, the relationships are only part of the backstory. So Tie-Dye is set in Thailand because that is where I was. That was what I knew. I was writing what I read, so it had to be crime fiction. But I also knew that D.I. Goodwin had to be a British detective to have any longevity for me as a series of books. So how do I get a British detective to Thailand? A relationship takes him there, the one with his daughter. So whilst all genres have all of these parts to a greater or lesser extent, their impact, the amount of them in the novel, is shaped by the genre. Crime fiction, I feel, and try to represent in my books, is faster paced and more thinking than feeling. That is achieved with structure, style, and inclusion or not, and extent or not, of the pace and feelings and emotions that they invoke in the reader. And the development is what comes from reading the genre that you write, in my opinion. Better authors may completely disagree with me, but this is the story behind my stories, and those two pieces of advice are what have stuck with me and what I find work for me and do for you as my readers. I felt it was important in this first episode of my podcast to share with you those fundamental ideas that I took along for the ride when I started writing my first novel. So let's get on with the more exciting stuff. Tie-dye. Tie-dye was my first novel. Now I don't know if you've read it, and if you haven't, buy it, read it, sign up for the audiobook. If you haven't read it, but you've seen the cover on my intro today, it is set in Thailand. So how did I end up in Thailand? That is the story behind the story. In my first job after leaving university, I was dating a guy and his name was Paul. Paul liked the odd smoke and he was very into his music. We weren't together very long, but we remained friends. Paul tended to work for 6 months a year and then go out and spend a good chunk of time in Thailand. It was much cheaper to live in Thailand, and then he could devote his time to listening to music rather than working. Each to his own, and that lifestyle worked very well for him. I, on the other hand, was just starting my career in IT, in financial services. I didn't have the flexibility like he did in his job. One day, in May or June of 2002, I was chatting with his best friend John. Paul was out in Thailand again, and it came up that he'd had a bad motorbike crash. Paul had been in hospital for several days. The brake had gone through the palm of his hand, and he was worried about infection. His friends were worried too, encouraging him to come home. Paul was having none of it. He wanted to stay in Thailand. Besides, he felt that it wouldn't be a good idea to travel that distance with raw, open wounds on his back, his legs, his arms, elbows, and this hole in his hand. I don't know what it was then. I don't know to this day. As they say, the universe works in mysterious ways. But I felt the need to go and help him. Despite being in the middle of quite a major project, I booked a week's holiday, sent him an email asking how I got to the resort on the island he was on, and booked a flight to Bangkok. Now I guess what you need to know was whilst I had travelled before around America, Australia, a Caribbean cruise, and plenty of Europe, I had never been to Asia. I never wanted to go to Asia. It had never appealed to me. I had this idea that it was a dangerous place. Lawless, corrupt, smelly. I don't know why. But I knew I'd never wanted to go. I've never been interested in anywhere in Asia, and I was scared. I didn't want to go then, but I pride myself on being a good friend, and in the absence of Paul's friends, having the money or the inclination to go and look after him. He was a friend in need, and I was the friend available and able, and that overrode my fear. So I stepped onto that plane bound for Bangkok with a printout of the email of instructions Paul had sent me, my tickets, my passport, and a bunch of natural remedies. 2 years earlier I had qualified as a Reiki practitioner, so I thought of myself as a bit of an advocate of natural remedies and natural health. I was also stocked up with aloe vera and various essential oils, and off I went. I don't remember much now about Bangkok. I never left the airport. I booked an internal flight direct from Bangkok to Koh Samui as per Paul's instructions. So all I had to do was go from the international terminal to the domestic terminal and got very little of a taste of Thailand or the uniqueness that is Bangkok in that terminal transfer. I can't remember now what it felt like. It was my first time of any of the numerous times I passed through Bangkok after that. I remember very little about how I felt, as I was sort of in the mode of, oh my god, I just need to get to Paul, then I won't be alone, and I will know someone in this completely alien country. I just needed to get to the island he lived on, and I'd be safe. At that point, I still had a flight in a smaller aeroplane, a taxi ride, a boat ride, and another taxi ride to go. I didn't know then that I was taking the fastest route to Koh Phangan. I didn't know that until later, and many other trips and routes and modes of transport would be used. For Goodwin, in the book, he took the same route as me to get to Koh Phangan that first time as I did. Like me, he wasn't travelling and enjoying the journey. He had a destination and someone important to him to get to. For me, it was Paul and medical aid. For Goodwin, it was his daughter and repairing their relationship. Goodwin was 10 years older than me then, a policeman, a father, and a man. So I couldn't put on him, in the book, the same fear I had when I went. But I could slightly twist it for him, with my experience as the base, to give him the fish out of water attitude, masked by his confidence in himself, that his age and experience gave him over the younger, his daughter's age, people around him. So that is what led me to Thailand the first time. Tune in next week for the story behind why I ended up living there from a week's holiday to help a friend.